The Metamorphosis Part II. As Part 2 opens, Gregor wakes in the evening from a deep sleep. He takes note of the injuries from the morning, and he sees that bread and milk have been left for him at the door. However, when he tries the milk, which had been his favorite drink, he doesn't like it. Through a crack in the door, Gregor sees a light on in the living room, but he doesn't hear any sounds. Gregor feels a sense of pride that he has been able to give his family this beautiful apartment, but he worries what will happen now if he can't provide for his family. At one point, he hears each door to his room open a tiny crack. Gregor waits for someone to enter, but no one does. The doors are locked from the outside. Gregor realizes that the family isn't going to come into his room until morning. The room that was so familiar to him now makes him anxious. He crawls under the couch, and there he feels most comfortable. There he remained the entire night, which he spent partly in a state of semi-sleep, out of which his hunger constantly woke him with a start, but partly in a state of worry and murky hopes, which all led to the conscious conclusion that for the time being he would have to keep calm and with patience and the greatest consideration for his family, tolerate the troubles which in his present condition he had forced to cause them. Now forced to cause them. In the morning, Gregor's sister opens the door to his room and looks inside. Greta doesn't see him right away, and when she notices him under the couch, she is shocked and slams the door closed. But she immediately opens the door again and walks in on her tippy toes. Gregor wonders if she'll notice that he hasn't had the milk. He's hungry, but he doesn't want to ask her for something else. Greta notices the milk and takes it away, returning with a variety of different foods for Gregor to try. She realizes that Gregor won't eat in front of her, so she leaves the room. Before trying the foods, Gregor realizes that his injuries have already healed. He finds certain foods to his liking, such as old cheese, while the fresh food doesn't taste good to him. He finishes eating, and when his sister enters the room again, he crawls back under the couch. In this way, Gregor got his food every day, once in the morning, when his parents and the servant girl were still asleep, and a second time after the common noon meal, for his parents were, as before, asleep then for a little while, and the servant girl was sent off by the sister on some errand or another. Certainly they would not have wanted Gregor to starve to death, but perhaps they could not have endured finding out what he ate other than by hearsay. Perhaps his sister wanted to spare them what was possibly only a small grief, for they were really suffering quite enough already. Gregor's able to get information by listening at the door, which he does often. He learns, for example, that on the first day of his metamorphosis, his change, the servant girl asked to quit her job. He also learned that the family's financial situation. His father has some money left from his business that had failed 5 years earlier. Gregor thinks back to that period. He had worked hard to earn money for the family to help them to try and forget the bad luck of his father's failed business. At the time, Gregor's only concern had been to devote everything he had in order to allow his family to forget as quickly as possible the business misfortune that had brought them all into a state of complete hopelessness. And so at that point, he'd started to work with a special intensity, and from an assistant had become, almost overnight, a traveling salesman, who naturally had entirely different possibilities for earning money and whose successes at work at once were converted into the form of cash commissions, which could be set out on the table at home in front of his astonished and delighted family. Those had been beautiful days. Gregor thinks about how those days did not come back. Even though he eventually earned enough money to support the entire family, the family accepted the money with thanks, but he had lost his closeness with his parents. Only he and his sister remained close, and he had a secret plan to send Greta to music school. While listening at the door, Gregor learns that in addition to the small amount of money left over from Mr. Samsa's business, the family had been able to save some of the money that Gregor brought home every month. This news makes Gregor happy. But the money to live on must be earned. Now his father was a healthy man, although he was old, who had not worked at all for 5 years now, and thus could not be counted on for very much. He had in these 5 years, the first holidays of his trouble-filled and unsuccessful life, put on a good deal of fat, and thus had become really heavy. And should his old mother now be able to work for money, a woman who suffered from asthma, from whom wandering through the apartment even now was a great strain, who spent every second of the day on the sofa by the open window laboring to breathe? Should his sister earn money, a girl who was still a 17-year-old child, whose earlier lifestyle had been so delightful that it had consisted of dressing herself nicely, sleeping in late, helping around the house, taking part in a few modest enjoyments, and above all, playing the violin. When it came to talking about this need to earn money, at first Gregor went away from the door and threw himself on the cool leather sofa beside the door, for he was quite hot from shame and sorrow. Gregor had trouble sleeping, and he moves a chair to the window so that he can see outside. But as time passes, he sees with less clarity. Greta, in her caring way, cleans his room and returns the chair to the window for Gregor, who wishes he could thank her for all of her efforts. Greta tries to be considerate of Gregor, but he notices the effect he has on the household. His sister has to immediately open the window when she enters Gregor's room because of the odor, and his appearance causes Greta to be uncomfortable. So he drags a sheet to the couch and allows him to hide himself when Greta is present. For the first 2 weeks of the change, Gregor's parents can't bring themselves to visit him, but they ask Greta about Gregor, and eventually Gregor gets his wish to see his mother. This wish is granted because Gregor, for fun and to stay occupied, crawls back and forth across the walls and the ceilings. Greta notices Gregor's new activity and wants to help by moving the furniture that's in the way, but she isn't able to do it on her own. She needs the help of her mother. His mother approached Gregor's room with cries of excited joy, but she fell silent in the door. Of course, his sister first checked whether everything in the room was in order. Only then did she let his mother walk in. In great haste, Gregor had drawn the sheet down even further and wrinkled it more. The whole thing really looked like a coverlet thrown carelessly over the couch. On this occasion, Gregor held back from spying out from under the sheet. Thus, he refrained from looking at his mother this time and was just happy that she had come in. "Come on, he's not visible," said his sister, and evidently led his mother by the hand. Greta and her mother do their best to move a heavy piece of furniture, but Mrs. Samsa isn't sure that removing the furniture is what Gregor wants. She's worried that taking away the furniture will be a sign that they are giving up hope of Gregor improving. Gregor himself is torn. Was he really eager to let the warm room, comfortably furnished with pieces he had inherited, be turned into a cavern in which he would, of course, then be able to crawl about in all directions without disturbance, but at the same time with a quick and complete forgetting of his human past as well? Was he then at this point already on the verge of forgetting, and was it only the voice of his mother, which he had not heard for a long time, that had aroused him? Nothing was to be removed. Everything must remain. In his condition, he couldn't function without the beneficial influences of the furniture, and if the furniture prevented him from carrying out his senseless crawling about all over the place, then there was no harm in that, but rather a great benefit. Greta, however, now considered herself an expert on matters related to Gregor. Meaning well, she insisted that all of the furniture, except the couch, be removed. Seeing his cherished items being taken out of the room worries Gregor. While the women take a break in the next room, Gregor crawls out and tries to save something. He sees a picture on the wall and crawls over to it, pressing his body against it. Greta returns to the room first and, seeing Gregor, hides her reaction so that her mother doesn't know that Gregor is out in the open. She then suggests to her mother that they should rest a bit longer in the living room. Mrs. Samsa suspects something, and she moves to the side and catches a sight of Gregor. She reacts before she is truly aware that the giant insect she is seeing is actually her son. She walked to the side, caught sight of the enormous brown splotch on the flowered wallpaper, and before she could become truly aware that what she was looking at was Gregor, she screamed out in a high-pitched, raw voice, "Oh God! Oh God!" and fell with outstretched arms, as if she were surrendering everything down onto the couch, and lay there motionless. "Gregor, you," cried out his sister with a raised fist and an urgent glare. Since his transformation, those were the first words that she had spoken directly at him. Greta leaves the room to get something to help her mother wake up from her fainting spell. Gregor, hoping to help, follows his sister. Once there, he doesn't know how to help and just waits behind Greta. When she turns and sees him, she is surprised and drops the bottle she is holding. Greta grabs some more bottles and rushes to her mother, slamming the door behind her. Gregor feels terribly guilty because he thinks he is responsible for his mother's condition, which might be near death. There's nothing for him to do but wait, and he crawls around everything in the room. In his sad condition, he gets dizzy and collapses onto the large table. Gregor's still on the table when Mr. Samsa returns. Greta tells him that Mrs. Samsa has fainted and that Gregor has broken loose. Mr. Sampson misunderstands Greta and thinks that she means Gregor has attacked Mrs. Sampson. Gregor realizes what's happening and goes to the door of his room to show his father that he will go inside the room immediately and that it's not necessary for Mr. Sampson to force him into the room. Mr. Sampson is angry, however, and Gregor notices a major change in him. He is no longer the weak and tired man of recent times. He was standing up really straight, dressed in a tight-fitting blue uniform with gold buttons, like the ones servants wear in a banking company. Mr. Sampson is about to attack Gregor, so Gregor runs away. But Mr. Sampson chases and throws apples at him, one of which becomes stuck in Gregor's back. Gregor notices that the door to his room is open, and Mrs. Sampson runs to Mr. Sampson and begs him to stop, which allows Gregor to escape. Only with his final glance does he notice that how the door of his room was pulled open and how right in front of his sister, who was yelling, his mother ran out in her undergarments, for the sister had undressed her in order to get some freedom to breathe in her fainting spell, and how his mother then ran up to his father. On the way, her tied-up skirt, one after the other, slipped down to the floor, and how, tripping over her skirts, she hurled herself onto his father and throwing her arms around him, in complete union with him. But at that moment, Gregor's powers of sight gave way. As her hands reached for the back of her father's head, she begged him to spare Gregor's life.